Good morning. It's a little bit after 11, so I guess it's time to start. Welcome to the Department of Psychiatry Grand Rounds. This morning it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lou Agosta. Dr. Agosta earned his PhD in philosophy at the University of Chicago with a dissertation entitled Empathy and Interpretation. And he's been running with that as his career scholarly activity ever since. He's an assistant professor of psychology at the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at Argosy University, an instructor of philosophy at the University of Chicago Graham School of Adult Education, and director of research at Allendang Psychotherapy Services in Chicago. He also has a psychotherapy practice in the Chicago Edgewater community. Lou specializes in making empathy present in his storytelling and listening, and he's committed to a gracious and generous listening based on empathy, which I personally experienced in meeting with him this summer to talk about his idea for a Grand Rounds. As an educator, he teaches empathy in the History and Systems of Psychology program at the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at Argosy. Lou has published 3 scholarly academic books on empathy, entitled Empathy in the Context of Philosophy, A Rumor of Empathy, Rewriting Empathy in the Context of Philosophy, and A Rumor of Empathy, Resistance, Narrative, and Recovery. Lou also undertook training as a psychodynamic therapist at the Chicago Institute for Psychoanalysis. However, he did not complete the program when he was summarily dismissed for asking publicly, "Is anyone beside me aware of a lack of empathy around here?" So with that, I will turn the program over to Lou to talk about a rumor of empathy, what empathy is, and how it makes a difference. Lou?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz, for that introduction. So the challenge is to make empathy present. Will we be able to do that in the next 45 or 50 minutes? I begin by acknowledging your empathy. You all are going to be doing some listening. And I appreciate that and recognize it and acknowledge it. I want to be concise and allow time for questions and interaction at the back end. Some logistics and housekeeping: make sure you have the color handout. There may be some rustling around if you don't. It's in the back on the left side there. It says how empathy function, two-sided copying, ladies and gentlemen, and then how empathy breaks down. So sometimes we can create a breakthrough out of breakdown. And one of the results of the conversation that we're going to have today, among others, is a short history of the distinction empathy. In fact, the secret underground history of empathy. We're going to define empathy. We're going to look at some examples of empathy in literature. So rather than clinical examples, I'm going to ask you to take it up a level. The guidance is, and with all due respect, don't be too concrete, don't be too literal. Let's get our metaphorical transference thinking caps on and look at empathy in some examples of world literature. And then if we have time, we're going to make time. I'm going to say a few things about how empathy is teachable, trainable, engageable. In fact, that's so important, I'm going to give you the answer right up front. Basically, people are naturally empathic. If we remove the obstacles to empathy, empathy shows up. In other words, the obstacles. What are the obstacles? Denial, resistance, cynicism. I have a great Dilbert cartoon. Don't get inside of a Dilbert cartoon. Hilariously funny, closely related to empathy. Now, denial, cynicism, guilt, shame, and the like. Remove the obstacles to empathy, and it naturally comes forth. So that's the answer. What's the question, right? How do we train empathy? So we're going to circle around and return to that at the back end. We're going to begin with a short, secret, underground history of empathy. 4 important, so this is going to be blazingly concise. This is the part which you may find somewhat academically challenging. But there, as you look at it in the upper left-hand corner, A man named David Hume, A Treatise of Human Nature, 1739. The word empathy in the English language was not even invented until 1895, when a Cornell University psychologist, a man named Edward Bradford Titchener, was translating some of the works of Wilhelm Wundt. I have to get my best German accent on here. Einfühlung comes across as empathy. He makes up the word. Okay. Meanwhile, and then so the rest of that's why we have a secret underground history of empathy. Hume is writing and has at least 5 different definitions of sympathy. I say, close enough. You have the handout. The complete deck is on the URL in the lower left-hand corner. I'm not going to speak slowly enough for you to take notes. I'm going to tell you what the 5 different definitions of sympathy are. They're there, and you can go back and get them. He never a stickler for consistency. The philosopher Hume defines sympathy as emotional contagion. He defines sympathy as suggestibility, the power of suggestion. He defines it in a somewhat technical way as a double representation of a vicarious experience of another person combined with the idea of the other. That maps closely to a modern definition of empathy that we find in psychology. He also defines sympathy as a delicacy of sympathy and taste, and this matter of substituting a certain kind of sympathy in the experience of the work of art. This is the secret underground history of empathy. We relate to other people on a good day as if they were works of art. That is, without use value, without manipulation, without knowing something, without categories, without argument. On a less good day, we struggle like everybody else. And finally, as benevolence. He defines sympathy as compassion or benevolence. And so the question, you've got all these definitions. What the heck is it? What is this definition? So I sent the class out. I had everybody in the class, in several classes, ask 5 people what they think empathy is. Not members of your family. People you know moderately well, not really close. You know, like people you might work with or run across at the club or at the gym or something. So there's a trend. So sometimes I go around saying, we don't need more data, we need expanded empathy. I've been known to say that. And nevertheless, we need both data and empathy. And it's not like more empathy. If I say more empathy, it's like there's something missing. Rather, you've got empathy. Let's expand it. So the languaging is significant as well. This is in the realm of tips and techniques. Okay, so anyway, I sent the people out, asked them. And so here's the trend. Most people think empathy is something like compassion. They tell a story about altruism, they tell a story about charity, they tell a story about doing good, they tell a story about making difference, they tell a story about being nice, and heavens knows, ladies and gentlemen, the world needs more niceness. It is distinct from empathy. We're going to say a little bit more about that, but first I want to very concisely touch on, as you look at the picture, the upper right-hand corner, Immanuel Kant. He died in 1804. He had the distinction between putting oneself in the position of the other person. He said, enlarged thinking. Think as the other thinks. And so that's top-down, in effect. That's the folk psychology definition of empathy. We take a walk in the other person's shoes. Where does the shoe pinch? Where does the moccasin chafe? And then he once again, interestingly and controversially enough, in the context of a theory of art and beautiful nature, he talks about the communicability of feeling. Art is impossible without the communicability of affect and feeling. That's stage 1 of empathy. Now, if you stop there, you get emotional contagion, you get suggestibility, you get a certain kind of shared mutual enthusiasm, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's further cognitive processing upstream and downstream that's going to occur. Nevertheless, it's right there. And then, so moving around the circle, and this is why this is the secret underground history. On the bottom left, a man named Theodor Lipps. You remember the movie Amadeus, where, Mozart is slaving away, and the most famous man of his day in the musical canon is Antonio Salieri, who today, except for the movie Amadeus, nobody would have ever heard of Antonio Salieri. I mean, he's not played on WFMT very occasionally now because of the movie, right? And today, Mozart, everybody knows Mozart, his music is played widely, and nobody's ever heard of Salieri until you come across the movie. Well, Theodor Lipps is Salieri to Freud's Mozart. Lipps wrote several volumes in which he gives currency in the German language to the word Einfühlung. He in effect replaces the distinction, aesthetic taste, judgment of a feeling of pleasure or displeasure with Einfühlung. And he is significant because 7 volumes of Lipps's work are in the Freud library. Freud encountered empathy by reading Theodor Lipps. And he footnotes Lipps explicitly in Freud's works on jokes and the relation to the unconscious, and in a number of his aesthetic works. There are 22 mentions of empathy in 24 volumes of the Freud library. And Troostman and Simmons, our colleagues over at the Analytic Institute, have done the scholarly work there. Here's the point. Almost every one of them is mistranslated. Freud says in so many words in his 1913 recommendations for physicians beginning psychoanalytic treatment that you will go wrong if you begin with any other method beside empathy. Quote, end quote. It's there. And that gets mistranslated as sympathetic understanding by Strachey, who have a few other devaluing things to say about the word empathy. So that's the secret. I mean, and then the rest is history, which we're not going to do in the necessary detail. We're going to move right along. So most people think that empathy is compassion. And heavens knows the world needs more compassion. It is not empathy. So what then is it? Well, basically, we're going to have about 2 or 3 different definitions, but the main definition, which you have in front of you, is to the effect that I know what the other person is experiencing because I experience it also. Not as a merger, but as a vicarious experience. Key term, vicarious experience. It contains the word vicar, which means representative. That's like this is like etymology, right? It actually works in this case. That is the bishop's representative to the community, the vicar of something or other. And in any case, and combined with the distinction other. And so basically, here's the distinction. Empathy tells me what the other person is experiencing and my good upbringing, my morals, my values, tell me what to do about it. And so that's the compassion part. And it's distinct. So having said that, now here's the most controversial slide. I want you to pick up on this because it could be a little bit controversial, and I hope that it is. I want to quote Jody Halpern, and I'm going to bend over here and I'm going to wave Jody's book at you, From Detached Concern to Empathy, Humanizing Medical Practice, Jody Halpern. This is 2001, so this has been around for a while. And you know, we're going to have lunch afterwards. If you want to take a picture of the cover, I'll bring it along with me and you can check it out. But basically she says, outside the field of medicine, empathy is a mode of understanding that specifically involves emotional resonance. So it's not just top-down, it's also bottom-up. I'm getting some kind of a vicarious experience. This may or may not be the case. This may or may not be the case around here. And so, you know, nevertheless, she puts a stake in the ground, and she is actually a psychiatrist. She has some more stories. I turn now to the explicit definition of empathy, which we're going to work with here. And there are 4 phases to it. And that's the handout. So if you came in late and you get the handout, it's on the left there in the back table. So you want to be on the side how empathy functions, right? You want to be on that. So basically, we're going to go around in a circle. We're going to go around in a circle here. That would be actually counterclockwise. I'm open to the other person. I'm receptive. I have some, and here's where one can insert the underlying physiology, the underlying neurology. That's not visible here. Mammals, we seem to resonate together. Something is going on. We're attached. It's a myth that we are unrelated. We are related physiologically, biologically. And so, phase 1 of empathy, I'm receptive. Phase 2, that creates a potential space for interaction. What's possible in the relationship? Do I relate to the other person by means and, or do I relate to the other person as a possibility, as a potentiality? We're going to see an example of that. And then actually you have to jump across. So that gives us empathic receptivity, empathic understanding, and empathic interpretation is the third aspect of empathy, and that is the folk psychology of empathy. I take a walk in the other person's shoes. I imaginatively change places with you. Now that's easier said than done because I don't know you. And 9 times out of 10, if I don't, I'm going to attribute to you aspects of my own character trait, who I am, what I'm up to, and that's the challenge, right? That's not going to be, and that's going to be a psychological mechanism called projection, which has its uses and is of interest, nevertheless is once again not empathy. And so I get a view from over there, but that does, especially when I come up short, I don't know who you are, where you came from. Then I go to the cognitive, imaginative projection, and that's very useful. And finally, empathy can be a tree that falls in the forest without anybody being there. Does it make a sound? Does it make a difference? I have to say something. I have to do something, a gesture, an aspect of behavior, to let the other person know whether or not I have gotten what their experience is. And sometimes that's called empathic listening. That'll work, a good, gracious listening that may be in itself sufficient, but sometimes it's not, especially if I don't know the other person. It may, we're highly verbal, you know, there's a lot of words. And sometimes it's necessary for me. And so empathic responsiveness. So we've got receptivity, understanding, interpretation, and responsiveness. I take the other person's experience and give it back to them in such a way, in such a form, that the other person recognizes the experience as their own. On a good day, that's how it works. That's the aha moment. That's what I was going through. Sometimes it could be the very words, but often it's not. Often it's, I got inside the movie of your life for a little while. Now each of these breaks down in an interesting way, and we're going to therefore look at the breakdown. So this summarizes something interesting, and which I think I do want to say. It's always useful to know the order in which one has one's slides. But basically, this is the matter of, so we're going to, this is front and loaded. I acknowledge this presentation is somewhat front and loaded because there are several important ideas I want to get into the space and on the table so that we can mix it up about it. But basically, so this is the compassion fatigue, the burnout, right? Heavens knows. Occupational hazards, professional challenges, big time, if I may say so. Right, so this is the guidance. This may be for the easier said than done file, nevertheless it must both be said and, insofar as humanly possible, done. If I'm interacting with somebody who is suffering, it is highly probable that I am going to suffer. The recommendation, the guidance is that I have a vicarious experience of that suffering. If I am suffering in such a way that I am in breakdown or upset, I'm doing it wrong. That's the easier said than done moment. If I'm overwhelmed by the suffering, as strange as it may sound to say, I should suffer, but not too much. And so this points to the matter of a granularity to the receptivity. There's a filter there, right? I mean, this is all hypothetical and interesting to engage. Nevertheless, I may want to make the filter more granular and do things to take a little distance. So it is not an on-off switch. The takeaway here, not an on-off switch, more like a rheostat, more like a dimmer. on a light switch. And this is where training and practice make a difference. So, so we're going to we may or may not come back to that, but I want that in the space so that we can work with it as we get to these examples. So we're going to look at, and so am I going in the right direction? Here we are. So we're going to look at, depending on time, and I see we're just on time, we're going to look at 3 or 4 examples here. I may cut this short because I want to say a little bit more about the training aspect, but we're going to look at Thomas Mann. So Thomas Mann's a storyteller. This story got told on or about the year 1900. It's about a family. The name of Buddenbrooks. They're a business family, right? And the context. So Thomas Buddenbrooks. So here's the inside skinny. Here's the bird's eye lowdown on this Buddenbrooks caper. Thomas Buddenbrooks is an artistic type. He's very artistic. And his father passes away in an untimely way, and Thomas, goes into the family business to pay the bills. You know, one can understand why one would do this. He gives up his artistic career, his artistic aspirations, and instead of pursuing an artistic career, he marries one. Her name is Gerda. She's an artistic type. We'll see a picture of her later. They have, and she's a virtuoso violinist playing passionate virtuoso violin duos with her talented father. It's really great. They have a great relationship. It's very good. It's a very good thing. And they have a son, Johann, Hanno for short. Guess what? He's an artistic type too. He's I would have to say, he's portrayed by Mann as being on a sickly kind. He's got bad teeth. This is going to be an issue because this is 1900, dental science. Oh my God, this is going to be interesting and not very, some people are already squirming in their seats. It's working. The mirror neurons are going off, even if they don't exist, you see. This might be a good point to digress. The myth of mirror neurons. Professor DeCiti, he's got the MRI machine down at Gates Blake. He recommended this book by Gregory Hitchcock. There's an underlying neurological mechanism, ladies and gentlemen. It does or doesn't have to be mirror neurons. How about association? Have you considered a good old-fashioned associative? There's some implementation mechanism. It's highly and interestingly controversial. I'll keep the book handy. It's a scholarly academic debunking, seems like. But what isn't debunked is our physiological relatedness. You see, even if they don't exist, we're physiologically related. That's interesting. And not in the way you might have thought. Okay, so anyway, the dentist, we're going to have a trip to the dentist here, thanks to Thomas Mann. And I'm actually going to read it to you, the paragraph-long quotation. So Hanno has bad teeth. In Mann, bad teeth are a sign of artistic sensibility. In the case of Hanno, he's kind of sickly, kind of small. He gets bullied by the strapling Nordic types down at school, They push him around. It's not a pretty picture. It's not. And his father becomes, although artistic, he gives it up. He's kind of badly compensated, I would say. And he's this hail fellow, well met. Buck up, my son. Give me your mathematical multiplication tables. And Hanno is like, I can't do it. He knows his tables, he just can't perform. He breaks down. It's pathetic. But he's like 7 years old. What do you want? Buck up, my son. It's boot camp, Dad. And it's not working. Okay, so meanwhile, there's a bit of oral, we can do the oral symbolism. Hanno needs to vigorously suck on the nibble of life, and he's really struggling to engage. Off to the dentist. Dr. Brecht, the dentist. It's already upon Dr. Brecht, it's broken, so I'm going to read you this slowly, okay? The bad thing about Dr. Brecht was he was nervous and dreaded the tortures he was obliged to inflict. We must proceed to extraction, he would say, growing pale. Hanno himself was in a pale, cold sweat, with staring eyes, incapable of protesting or running away. In short, in much the same condition as a condemned criminal. He saw Herr Brecht, his sleeves, the forceps, bending over him, and noticed that little beads were standing out on his bald brow, and that his mouth was twisted. When it was all over, and Hanno, pale and trembling, spat blood into the blue basin at his side, Herr Brecht, too, had to sit down and wipe his forehead and take a drink of water. So what's going on here? A breakdown. This is a breakdown in Dr. Brecht's empathic receptivity. He's one might argue, arguably, compare and contrast. The description itself gives us access to the phenomenon, right? Both are sweating. Brecht's mouth is twisted. Interesting. The mirror neurons are going off there. His mouth is twisted. The hypothetical. Okay, so here we go. So what's the recommendation? This is the time for a bad joke, right? He should have gone into ophthalmology. I don't know. Forgive me. Okay, so we'll back that one out. Okay. Pause for laugh. But anyway, it's a serious and significant group. I get that. And so here's the breakdown. And so what's the recommendation? Given that empathic receptivity is breaking down on the part of Dr. Brecht, he has to get some distance from the tortures. He is in, this is 1900, dental science is like, oh my God, it's hard to think, right? And so he has to increase the granularity of the filter. Easier said than done. But practice. What does that look like? Because he's providing a useful service. Your mouth is bad. It's misery. There's all kinds of misery. Okay, so I pause for breath at this point. I would entertain questions even at this point about the example. This is not a quiz. And I know you're eager for me to move along, but don't be shy. Raise your hand. Okay. So we will move to the next example then. But if you think of anything, we can cycle back around. So remember the setup. Thomas Buddenbrooks gives up his artistic career, and instead he marries someone who is very artistic, Gerda. And she is artistic. And now she has to move. They relocate because the Buddenbrooks live in a different town than her father. So she's no longer playing duos with her father. She's got nobody to play with, one might say. So she meets the lieutenant, who happens to be a talented violinist, in addition to his military aspirations. So they're upstairs playing passionate violin duos, and Thomas has an office downstairs, and he's listening to the violin music, and that's not the problem. There's nothing wrong with that. The music stops. There's silence. There's more silence. There's even more silence. Thomas is going crazy. Is he going to become the caricature of a jealous husband? That would be throw the guy out. That would be a scandal. He'd be a caricature, right? So he's wandering around, pacing back and forth. They're in there. And pacing back and forth, he runs into Hanno in the hallway. Next quotation. His father did not seem to be listening. He held Hanno's free hand and played with it absently, unconsciously fingering the slim fingers. And then Hanno heard something that had nothing to do with the lesson at all. His father's voice, in a tone he had never heard before, low, distressed, almost imploring. Hanno, the lieutenant, has been more than 2 hours with Mama. Little Hanno opened wide his golden brown eyes at the sound, and they looked, as never before, clear, large, and loving straight into his father's face, with its reddened eyelids under the light brows, its white puffy cheeks, and long, stiff mustaches. God knows how much he understood. But one thing they both felt, in the long second when their eyes met, all constraint, coldness, and misunderstanding melted away. Hanno might fail his father in all that demanded vitality, energy, and strength, but where fear and suffering were in question, there they were as one. Empathic understanding. Hanno gets something that he had not previously perceived. Previously, his father was boot camp dad, multiplication tables, right? And Hanno goes, I forgot. Now he sees. So what's the word? Vulnerability. That's one possible description. This boot camp dad is vulnerable. He's suffering. Hanno doesn't get the reason. He does, playing violin duos, silence, what's all that? He's like 7 or 8 years old, right? He's not. And so their eyes meet. That is the moment of empathic receptivity, embedded in empathic understanding. The father who was so inaccessible in his hail fellow well met and boot camp style cross-examination of Hanno about his lessons becomes vulnerable and accessible in his suffering. Hanno gets it. His father's suffering is a possibility of his humanity. They share a human moment. The possibility of relatedness emerges in which both are human beings and in emotional connection with one another. This had not been available to Hanno before, for whom his father was this strong, demanding taskmaster. Now he sees his father's vulnerability, and it humanizes both of them. This is also an example of empathic understanding that works to an extent. But ultimately, the father remains, you've got to get into the role, and the story goes along as the story goes along. I see that you want to get just a picture there. The lieutenant and Gerda are practicing, she's giving a master class in practicing pizzicati on the violin. And so let's do a reality check here. I want to leave both enough time for questions and to say something about a little bit more about training. So I'm going to fast forward through interpretation. If you get the deck, you can get some other, and move on to the Glass Menagerie. Tennessee Williams, that is I think, a formidable psychologist. So the story in brief. The story in brief. Amanda is the mom. Laura is the frail, fragile keeper of the Glass Menagerie. She kind of lives in the back room, the daughter. She has a brother, Tom, who has a job. Tom has a friend, Jim. Amanda, the mother, had many gentlemen callers in her youth. She was popular. I'm going to be popular, right? Anyway, we could do a little tune from Wicked at this point, but perhaps we won't. We can splice that in later. But as she was popular, now she's fading. The bloom is off the flower in the circa 1950s, and she so badly wants Laura to get a date. She wants her to have a gentleman caller. So she pressures her son, Laura's brother, Tom, to bring somebody from down at the in effect, it's a factory. And finally, Tom invites Jim, his friend. There are information asymmetries in the story. Jim's already engaged. Get ready. Okay. You don't necessarily know that at this point, but we'll just to follow along. So the invitation is accepted. At last, a gentleman caller. The problem is Jim thinks it's just a casual dinner with his friend Tom, but in fact, he then meets Laura, who knew Jim from grammar school. They went to grammar school together. Small world, right? Small world. And Jim sees her and says 2 words, blue roses, your blue roses. And Laura is taken aback. She, once again, had many childhood illnesses, including pleurisy. And when the teacher, this was the day when the teacher would say, why you weren't in school? Well, she's got pleurosis or pleurisy. Nobody knew what that meant anyway. But Jim hears that as blue roses. So here's the point, we'll cut to the chase, right? She also has another childhood disease which leaves one of her legs slightly shorter than the other, polio. And as she walks down the aisle, her experience of herself is that she's making this enormous clump, clump, thump, clump, thump, clump, as she walks down the aisle, and everybody must know about it, of course. Jim didn't even perceive it. And so we have here an example of what amounts to empathic responsiveness. He gives her back his experience of who she is for him. For Jim, Laura is blue roses, something beautiful, even if kind of melancholy. She's got this melancholy aspect to her, which makes her all the more attractive, of course, and a little bit shy and so on. We can work with that. We can work with that. That's doable, you know. And whereas she experienced herself as clump, thump, clump, thump. Right? The asymmetry there is very powerful. It's a very nice, I think Williams is a brilliant psychologist. And it ends, unfortunately, he's also pretty depressed himself, and it ends badly. Nevertheless, we're going to enjoy the moment, the emotional devastation. Okay, so that's 3 out of 4 examples. Now, we're just on time. I'm going to talk for maybe, hopefully, I'm going to tell you about an exercise rather than do the exercise. I call this exercise, I can't hear you because my opinion of what you are saying is so loud. I'm going to be disarmingly candid. So, here's the disarmingly. I'm walking down the street and I am ashamed of myself. The author of 3 books on empathy. How did that person get to be that way? I'm judging and evaluating. There's these thoughts going coming by. What happened to you? I don't say this to anybody else. And I don't even have to say what it is. It's a devaluing thought, right? It's well, wherever it comes from, it's not authentically who I am. And this seems to be, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest, and with all due respect, I'm not the only one. You want to take this and apply it as appropriate and to yourself there. I can't hear you because the opinion of what you are saying is so loud in my own thinking. So this is an exercise, not how to listen better, but how to expand one's listening, right? Stop, and so actually, this is where the cartoon comes in handy. Let's see if this is queued up. There's an exercise here. This is how to train for empathy. Don't do this. What does it mean to train empathy? Remove obstacles such as cynicism, categorizing people, labeling, pigeonholing, and so I'll read this to you just so some of you are picking up on it now. So there's the pointy head boss. From now on, all teams will be formed on the basis of Myers-Briggs personality types. If you do not have a personality, one will be assigned to you by human resources. Okay, pause for laughter at this point. This is deeply cynical. This is don't do, this is what not to do, right? And then the final, we need a quiet, dumb guy to pair with an extroverted thinker. Well, here, the cynicism is what gets in the way of empathy. Now, that is not to say that it is not abroad in the land, and sometimes corporations go off the rails. So what the exercise consists of doing is going inward and realizing that if one goes inward far enough, one encounters the other. So we actually are going to take literally a half a minute and do the exercise. So I'm going to ask you to be quiet and listen to yourself. And I'm going to time it. Now there may be beepers going off, so just include that because this is, after all, a hospital. There are, really, no kidding. But listen to what is there. Okay, are you ready? Does any questions before they do the, is it clear what I'm asking you to do. Please say if it's not clear, because I know you're like, it's a very significant talk and you're like kind of into it, right? Okay, so you're just going to listen to whatever is there. Okay, ready, set, go. Okay, that's 30 seconds. That's 30 seconds. Now you might have heard something like, what is he talking about? Where did this guy come from? What voice? What conversation? That's the one. That's the one. That's the one. It's not who I authentically am, but it occurs. And that is a source of empathic understanding. I am in relationship with the other, and I'm going to have judgments, opinions, evaluations, philosophical arguments, categorizations, labels, and it's not to say there's anything wrong with those. Those occur, they are inevitable. You can't, ladies, you can't stop it. You can't prevent it. What you want to do is get some distance from it and realize when it's useful and when it's less useful. And so, with that said, we're going to have some time for questions. The one final thought I leave you with, and it's a direct consequence of this little exercise to listen to oneself. When all the labels are removed, when all the categories are removed, when all the philosophical arguments are removed, when all the cynicism, hostility, affectation, even compassion, sadness, fear, guilt, shame, when all of these things are removed, empathy consists in being in the presence of another human being. What are your questions? The lady in the back. I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
So do you believe you can teach empathy to students?
Do you think you can teach empathy? The short answer is yes. And the so I'm going to repeat the answer I just gave. We're naturally empathic. Remove the cynicism, denial, shame, guilt. Empathy naturally shows up. That's the training. Now, that's not, consider the possibility, right? I mean, a lot of this, is this the truth with a capital T? Well, consider the possibility. Now, are there other tips and techniques? This is the realm of tips and techniques. Listen to one. My reaction to you tells me something about both of us and a lot about myself, which I then parlay forward to understand the relationship. Does that help? Could you want to follow up? Well, where's it coming from? Where's your question coming from?
I'm an instructor, and I think empathy is, I'll speak up, I think it's terribly important and lacking sometimes, and so we try to teach it. I'm not sure that directly.
Well, and so one has to create I'll just repeat that in case somebody up front didn't hear it. It's important that the individual is an instructor and a teacher, and it's not trivial. It's not a trivial undertaking. You didn't actually use that word. And the thought that I have about that is that it is a challenge to create a context in which empathy can show up. Right? That's not a trivial undertaking. A lot of teaching is information. I put information in your bucket. You bring a bucket or a basket and the teacher puts in. There's nothing wrong with that. We need that. It's essential. The world doesn't work without information. And there's also the other aspects, dimensions, especially to our humanity and what happens in the context of a conversation. So, there's some work to be done on creating, and that's why I think sometimes literature has its uses in creating a context for a conversation. That's just kind of why I find it useful. Other questions? I mean, feel free to challenge me. Yeah, please.
So, as an intern, so just going back, I'm thinking of the opposite ways of empathy. What about with, like, instructors or people who have been practicing for so long that they have this type of hardened, view, and now are not, they have their guard up, and they're not
Yeah.
as empathetic as they were. How do you reinsert?
So I'm going to repeat that. Individuals have been I'm paraphrasing, in the trenches for a while and become hardened. I think you used that word. And how does one recover from that? So I would also put on the list compassion fatigue, burnout. This is a significant occupational hazard. I mean, so bold statement of the obvious, take some time off and self-care. This is the case for self-care, that one has to find some things where one can restore one's emotional energies, if you will, that we have something like emotional energy. Because being burned out, being compassion fatigued, I ain't doing nobody any good, much less myself, right? I mean, and so sometimes one has to get some supervision. I mean, leaving aside matters such as vacation. And that is where I find humor, which is closely related to empathy. I mean, Dilbert is deeply cynical, right? But in both empathy and humor, one traverses a boundary. In the case of humor, one can say, look, the boss is an idiot, and it's funny. Human Resources says a personality will be assigned to you. It's hilarious, right? Try to do this. It doesn't. It's the reduction to absurdity, right? Philosophically, it's a reductio. So one can use humor. So this is the case for one's own psychotherapy, if you will. I mean, the therapist, him or herself, may usefully encounter at some point in their development something like whatever this thing is, therapy, having a conversation with oneself, journaling. It may become a self-sustaining process. I get a lot out of journaling. I mean, some people do and some people don't, and I swear by it. I'm not assigning it to anybody, but in terms of resources, that's the kind of thing you want to look at. And there's other spiritual modalities. I wouldn't know any other way. One needs to get some empathy. Bingo. Thinking on his feet. Where do I get some empathy? The world is not generous in the matter of certain things such as empathy, and put it on the list with compassion as well. Right? And so one has to find some resources to recharge one's empathy. Oftentimes it's family, not always. I mean, I know people suggest a group. It might work. I feel like we're all kind of struggling with that, right? Because the hours are long and they don't get shorter. We have to create some for ourselves, bring it forth. I mean, in personal, I experienced a lack of empathy, so I actually started writing about it, right? And that was how I approached it, and I kind of symbolically created some for myself. Now I have to keep writing, I guess. Other questions? How are we doing here?
We have to stop.
Okay, we're going to have to... Do we have time for one more question? One final question.
One quick.
Okay, I'll be concise. Go ahead. Please, the gentleman.
When you think of the triad for good therapists, you want somebody who's empathetic, warm, and genuine. Now, how do they fit together?
Yeah, okay, well, the concise answer is the triad is empathy, empathy, and empathy. And warm and accessible is also useful. So pause, and on a good day, the other individual will show you, me, who she or he is. If they get that I am present without categories, distinctions, label, on a good day, they'll reveal their soul. On a less good day, we'll struggle like everyone else. Thank you so much. Now, I heard there was some lunch. I don't know if there is. Yeah. Well, we'll find out. I think I heard it was up on 6. I'm going to go up there and check it out.